Walter White wasn't just a genius chemist and a feared drug dealer, he was also a master manipulator. As he transformed into Heisenberg, he used carefully crafted lies to protect himself, control those around him, and build his empire. But along the way, there were moments where his double life almost got exposed. In this video, we're ranking Walter's best lies, from the simplest to the most elaborate. Support groups. In the early seasons, Walter would lie to Skyler that he was going to support groups for people with cancer, using his illness as a shield. The bad thing about this lie is that Skyler was going to start suspecting that he was being unfaithful or worse. But when she found out that her husband had 2 cell phones, that lie was never going to be able to be used again. Drew Sharp. This lie is quite brief, but cruel. We all know that after the death of this child, Jesse had a very hard time, and he believed that Walter did too. But no, even though Mr. White himself told him that he was very affected by the child's death, moments later Jesse heard him whistling, in a very relaxed way. This certainly helped Jesse wanted to get out of the business, away from Walter forever, so Mr. White's lie and manipulation didn't help him at all, because it showed that he never cared about the sudden death of the boy. Although for a few days, Jesse did believe Mr. White's deceptions, thinking that he really cared about Drew Sharp's death. Car accident. Hank was advancing in his investigation, and when he discovers that Gustavo owns a laundry, where, according to Hank, he could have a hidden laboratory, he goes with Walter to the place, and the latter, afraid that he will discover the truth, causes an accident so that Hank postpones his investigation. According to Walter, he did not see the car, and Hank believed his lie, but if he had been smarter, he would have suspected his brother-in-law. Gasoline excuse. In Season 5, when Jesse discovers that Walter poisoned Brock, he tries to set his house on fire by spraying gasoline in the living room, but Hank stops him and proposes an alliance to take Walter down. Walt, upon arriving home, tries to clean up the gasoline to no avail, so he makes up an implausible excuse. He says that the hose from the gas station exploded on his clothes and left the smell in the house. While this kind of convoluted lie worked for Walt in the earlier seasons, now no one believed his story, but his son, in his innocence, assumes that the fumes made him pass out due to his cancer. Walter follows the lie and suggests staying at a hotel for a few days, looking for Jesse. At the end of the 5th season, after Jesse discovers the whole truth, from one moment to the next, he disappears. Walter, worried that he will make a mistake that will affect his life, asks Jack and his men to kill him, but they don't know his whereabouts, so Walt devises a strategy to lure him out. Walter visits Andrea and asks her to get in touch with Jesse, telling her that he was there looking for him. Also, worrying Andrea that he might be in prison because he went back to drugs. The bad news is that Walter didn't know that Todd was later going to kill her to make sure Jesse wouldn't try to escape again from the clutches of the neo-Nazis. Jesse, the pot dealer. When Walter started cooking methamphetamine, Skyler noticed something was wrong. Her husband was spending a lot of time away from home, and when she discovered Jesse Pinkman's number on the answering machine, she confronted her husband. Under pressure, Walter lied to her, saying that his former student was just selling him marijuana. Skyler tried to get him to give up this supposed addiction, but Walter asked her to leave him alone. Wary and determined, she went straight to Jesse to demand that he stop selling drugs to her husband, or else she would inform Hank to take him to prison. Walter, who knew his wife well after more than 15 years of marriage, knew she is nosy and would eventually seek Jesse out. Luckily, Skyler gave him a chance to get away, and he never got to see Emilio's body, because if he had, everything would have ended very badly. Second cell phone. At the beginning of Season 2, after Walter's supposed disappearance, Skyler began to suspect that her husband had a second cell phone. Before he disappeared, she had seen him receive a call, which was not registered on his regular phone. When Walter returned, Skyler insisted on her theory, but he repeatedly denied it, even lying that it was an alarm to remind him to take his meds. And though she never believed him, she decided to let it go until, when Walter was medicated, he let slip that he had more than one cell phone. His weak lie crumbled over time, and when Skylar confirmed the truth, she kicked him out of the house because she discovered the truth of more of his lies. Walter visits his mother. When Walter noticed a suspicious spot on his lung, he thought he had little time left to live. Determined to make the most of the time, he went to the desert with Jesse to cook methamphetamine for several days. To justify his absence, he told Skylar that he was going to visit his mother. However, this plan had one major flaw. Even though Skylar didn't have the best relationship with her mother-in-law, she could have easily called her to confirm her husband's whereabouts. This would have put Walter in a difficult situation since, in addition, he had never told his mother about his lung cancer. In the end, his lie ended up falling apart when Skylar discovered he had a second cell phone, which crumbled not only this excuse, but also the next lie: fugue state. The fugue state might have worked had Walter not revealed that he had a second cell phone. But despite Walter's safe and sound arrival home, Skylar was more concerned that her husband was hiding a secret. But she didn't know what. Nevertheless, Walter, by presenting himself weak, confused, and naked, managed to make no one in their right mind think he was making it up. Besides, the lie was the one that helped him and Jesse get out of going to jail, because at the crime scene, Pinkman's car and money were found, and together with him, they came up with a plan to fool Hank and company. Medical bills. Although Gretchen and Elliot appeared in only a few episodes, they were instrumental in understanding Walter's complex psychology. As a co-founder of Gray Matter, Walt always believed that Gretchen and Elliot had taken his research from him, when in fact his departure from the company was out of insecurity, after realizing that the family of his ex-girlfriend, Gretchen, was a millionaire, and he was not. After his cancer diagnosis, Gretchen and Elliot offered to pay for his treatment, but Walt refused help and instead financed his chemotherapy with drug money. However, he lied to Skylar, assuring her that his friends were covering the costs. This lie unwittingly dragged them into his deception, and when Skylar thanked Gretchen, she demanded that Walt tell his wife the truth. When confronted, Walt reacted with anger and resentment, unable to admit the reality of his situation. Although, also thanks to the lie on the second cell phone, Skylar discovered that they didn't pay a dime for Walter's treatment. But if Skylar hadn't discovered that sooner or later, Gretchen would have told him the truth. Walter's lie had an expiration date, along with his fugue state and his supposed visit to his mother, Jane. We all remember the shocking ending of the Phoenix episode when Walter saw Jane die and decided not to intervene. Her death not only caused the tragic plane crash, but also plunged Jesse into a deep depression as he felt responsible for the loss of his girlfriend. Walter could have saved Jane, but chose not to because Jane posed a threat. Not only did she have Jesse under her control, but she also knew too much about Walter and could have told Skylar everything. Furthermore, Walter understood that confessing the truth to Jesse would have been a grave mistake, as, shattered, he could have revealed his criminal empire to both Skylar and Hank. Although Jane's death affected him, Walter kept the secret for over a year, until, in a cruel act, he confessed it to Jesse only to make him suffer. Despite everything, hiding the truth allowed him to keep Jesse on his side for most of the series, being a key piece in his criminal operation. I am the danger. In the middle of season 4, Walter assures his wife that he is the danger, but this is not so. Walter or Heisenberg may be quite dangerous, but in this scene he is just trying to convince himself that he is. Skylar has known him for quite some time. Even she herself recognizes that her husband is afraid, and the truth is that he is. Let's remember that he feels threatened by Gustavo, which creates paranoia in him. Mike is not on his side, and Jesse is becoming more and more distant, so he can't control him. He's really alone. Then, his monologue of "I am the danger" is just to psych himself up that Walter is important, dangerous, and essential to Fring's operation, even though no one wants to work with Walter. This makes Walter feel insecure. That's why he says all that to Skylar. He's not willing to make his wife believe he could be in danger. He wants to be seen as powerful. But deep down, we know that's not so, because in 2 more episodes, even though Walter tells a guy that the main thing is to be in control in his life, in the next scene, we see that Gustavo is the one controlling Walter most of the time. Also, in Season 5, Walter reveals to Skylar that he was indeed in danger.
I can promise you that Gus Fring is dead. And he was the threat. He was the danger.
I thought you were the danger.
Infidelity. After Marie witnessed Skylar's breakdown, Marie asked Walter to tell her the whole truth, as her sister had acted strangely earlier that day. Although Walter told true things, he also manipulated the situation to protect himself. He assured Marie that Skylar was affected by Ted Beneke's accident, with whom she had been having an affair. This response put Marie a little more at ease, seeing Walter as the victim rather than her sister. Marital problems. For Walter White, the most important thing in the 5th season was his business. After defeating Gustavo Fring, he had the opportunity to become the most powerful drug dealer in New Mexico. However, unlike Fring, Walt did not have a stable network of contacts or a steady supply of the chemicals needed for methamphetamine production. One of their main problems was methylamine, as they believed Lydia had cut off their supply. Since no one would believe Lydia if she simply denied it, Walter and the others came up with a plan to have her call Hank and ask him why there was a tracer under a barrel of methylamine. This is where Walt creates one of his most clever lies. Despite going through a marital crisis, his priority is still his business. With a calculated performance, he fakes a moment of vulnerability and bursts into tears in his brother-in-law's office. This not only makes Hank uncomfortable, but also gives him the opportunity to hide a bug in the office. Thanks to this tactic, they discover that Lydia was not responsible for the tracker, but was planted by the DEA agents, and after this, she helped them with the information to rob a train with a sea of methylamine. Later, Walter reuses the same lie to infiltrate Hank's office again and remove the bug without arousing suspicion. Gambling addiction. Although this lie was originally Skylar's idea, Walter had to play it with conviction to maintain the facade. The official explanation for his illegal income was that he had developed a gambling addiction, which justified the money with which they paid Hank's medical bills and the purchase of the car wash. With this lie, Skylar and Walter could quietly launder the money in the business without arousing suspicion. Plus, Hank was already putting the Heisenberg case aside. However, the lie began to crumble when Walt let his ego take over. During a dinner with Hank, Walter, under the influence of alcohol, insinuated that Heisenberg was still at large. It all started because Hank talked about Gale as if he was a true genius, which upset Walt, as he always seeks recognition. His pride led him to say that Gale was not the real Heisenberg, planting in Hank the doubt that would lead him to continue his investigation and eventually uncover the truth, freeing Skylar. After all of Walter's secrets are exposed, and after his entire family turns against him, he kidnaps Holly to take her with him. However, he soon regrets his decision. Before returning her, he takes advantage of the situation to exonerate Skylar from any legal responsibility. During a phone call, Walter deliberately incriminates himself, claiming that he was the only one to blame and that his wife had no involvement in his crimes. To make the alibi more credible, he insults her and accuses her of disobeying him, painting himself as a tyrant. Skylar, understanding his intention, plays along, thus managing to avoid several charges against her. Gale. In the Season 3 finale, Jesse was missing, hiding from Gustavo after trying to take out 2 of his dealers in revenge for what they did to Andrea's brother. But Walter ended up killing them. Gustavo, after this, wanted to cut ties with Walter and assassinate both him and Jesse. Fring pressured Gale to learn the blue methamphetamine formula, and somehow Walter knew that if Gale learned it, Gustavo would get rid of Walter. So Mr. White devises a plan with Jesse: murder Gale, so Gustavo won't fire them, and even worse, kill them. Jesse gets Gale's address, and when Walter is about to go to his apartment, Victor intercepted him and took him to the lab with the excuse that something was going wrong. At the place, Mike was waiting for him, ready to execute him. However, Walter acted quickly and lied so convincingly that he managed to stop his own death. In a last-ditch attempt to survive, he pretended to cooperate with giving Jesse's whereabouts and instead ordered Jesse to eliminate Gale. His lie was so perfect that even Mike was impressed by Walter's cunning. Confession tape. Hank was determined to catch his brother-in-law, but he had no solid evidence to put him in prison. The situation worsened when Walter recorded a video confession tape in which he manipulated the facts and blamed Hank for being Heisenberg. In the recording, Walt claimed that his brother-in-law forced him to be his chemist, that he was involved in the war against Gustavo Fring, where he was injured, and that he was responsible for the explosion at the retirement home, and, to make matters worse, that his medical treatment had been financed with drug money. This setup left Hank in a very dangerous position, since without evidence against Walter, everything could turn against him. Fortunately, Jesse decided to join him in taking down Walt, but if this had not happened, Hank might have had no choice but to keep quiet and leave Walter alone. "I did it for my family." Perhaps the most recurrent lie of the show is Walter saying that he did everything for his family, but deep down we know that's not true, at least in the last seasons. In the beginning, he did do everything for Skyler, Junior, and Holly, but later on his motivation was also a bit selfish because he liked to feel that sense of power. But in Felina, when everything had fallen apart, he has his last moment with Skyler, where he admits that everything he did was for him. Many believe that Walter is lying to her to leave her more alone and make her feel better, but it's not true. There is no reason to lie at this point. Unfortunately, his admission came too late to change anything, but for what it's worth, because I know many believe he was lying in this scene. Vince Gilligan himself has said that Walter was honest in this scene. Brock's poisoning. For most of season 4, Jesse and Walter were at each other's throats, and this was troubling for the protagonist because without Jesse, he was almost nothing. Also, Jesse was more on Mike and Gus' side at the time. Walter was desperate to have him back and does something cruel. He poisons Brock. Also, strangely, Jesse's ricin lace cigarette disappeared after visiting Saul, and he immediately became suspicious of Walter. He visits him to kill him, and Walter lies to him that Gus wanted to turn them against each other so that Jesse would kill Walter. And finally, Walter convinced him that Fring was the culprit because he is the only one who uses children, as in the case of Tomas, and Jesse blamed himself and believed that Brock somehow found his misplaced ricin cigarette. Even in season 5, Walter played along when Jesse blamed himself, saying that he reacted badly by wanting to kill him, being that he supposedly had nothing to do with Brock's poisoning. And well, it's worth noting that Bryan Cranston wasn't told that his character did poison Brock, which is why his lie is so convincing. In the end, Jesse, furious with Fring, joins forces with Walter to finish off Fring for good. Thanks to this well-planned lie, Walter managed to get Jesse to join him in order to finish off Gus once and for all. However, the price of his victory was high, as he used a child as a key player in his twisted game. Walter White's lies not only helped him survive, but also reflected his intelligence, manipulation, and his evolution into Heisenberg. However, while each deception was crucial to his rise, they also ended up being the cause of his downfall.